I've never been able to forget that feeling, like I didn't quite belong in my own home. It wasn't an obvious kind of coldness, but something quieter. Something that gnawed at me from the inside out. The way I was ignored, as if my existence was just a dull gray background to someone else's bright shining picture. "She's not going to get very far," my mother once said, when she thought I wasn't listening. And that she was me. Maya. My sister, the one around whom our entire household seemed to revolve, was named Lauren. Only 2 years older than me, but I always felt like I was growing up under her endlessly long shadow. A shadow that could talk, smile charmingly, and make people believe it was the only thing worth looking up to. We lived in the suburbs of Oregon, in an old 2-story house my parents always proudly called our home. My dad owned a small auto repair shop in town, while my mom stayed at home and occasionally took sewing orders. Life wasn't lavish, but it wasn't exactly lacking either. At least not for Lauren. She had all the latest things. Real Converse sneakers. A brand new iPhone every time Apple released one. And me? I got her hand-me-downs, or things slightly broken, like a phone with a long crack across the screen that was still usable. I didn't envy material things, or at least I thought I didn't. But what hurt more was the difference in how my parents treated us. Every time Lauren got a good grade, we had a little celebration. Dad would bring home pizza and Mom would bake an apple pie. I once got an A on my history presentation, and all I received was a curt remark from Mom. "Keep it up, just don't let your grade slip." I did well in school, not outstanding but always hardworking. I joined the school eco club, even organized a book drive for the local library. But to my parents, none of that seemed worth mentioning, when Lauren was captain of the cheer team, had won a partial scholarship to a summer dance camp, and was the pride of the whole family. When relatives came over, Mom would go on and on about Lauren's achievements. Meanwhile, I'd sit in the kitchen peeling fruit, listening as my name was forgotten, like I'd never even existed in this so-called perfect family picture. I still remember it clearly. Once, I was selected to participate in a statewide writing competition. Only 5 students from our school were chosen. I was so excited to bring home the notice, hoping for praise. But just as I started to speak, Mom cut me off. "Lauren has a performance coming up at the Art Center. Are you going?" I got this letter. "Later, okay? I'm busy sewing your sister's dress." The letter sat on the table, weighed down by a grocery ad, and somehow ended up in the trash. I don't even know when. My dad was different. He didn't say much, but when he spoke about me, there was always a note of disappointment in his voice. "Maya, you need to be more realistic. Not everyone's got that standout quality like Lauren. You should learn a trade, something stable. I can teach you how to fix cars. No need to chase dreams." I'd heard words like that so often, they stopped hurting. They just made me tired. I was never encouraged to dream big. While Lauren was sent to expensive summer camps, I was told to learn to be independent. That the world out there wasn't kind to people who weren't exceptional. Every time I brought up my dream of going to college, my mom would shake her head. "You should consider something practical, like hairdressing or being a nail tech. It's more realistic and doesn't cost much." I used to believe them. I believed I wasn't good enough, that being forgotten was somehow my fault. But the scariest part was when you start telling yourself, maybe they're right. It wasn't until much later that I realized. It wasn't that I was ordinary. They just never wanted to see me clearly. I still remember the day Lauren got her college acceptance letter like it was yesterday. The moment she tore open that envelope and shouted, "I got into UCLA!" The entire house exploded with joy. Mom hugged her, eyes brimming with tears. Dad was speechless, just clapped her on the back and said a sentence I'll never forget. "We've been preparing for this day for a long time." That night, they threw a party in the backyard. Relatives, neighbors, friends, everyone was invited. There was a 3-tiered cake, string lights glowing along the fence, and even a live country band. Dad hired a photographer to capture the turning point in Lauren's life. I stood off to the side, holding a warm can of soda, watching my sister shine in a brand new cobalt blue dress. Mom's favorite color. She's going to change the future of this family, Mom said to Aunt Ruth as they watched Lauren laugh with her friends. We've been saving since the day she was born. I was 17 then, a senior in high school. I had applied to a few community colleges and even one state university out of state. I wasn't aiming high, I just wanted a chance. One time to be supported, to be believed in. I waited until one evening when Dad was watching the news, and Mom was folding laundry, my heart pounding like it would burst. I held out the acceptance letter from Arizona State University. Not a prestigious school, but one that had the business program I wanted to pursue. Mom, Dad, I just got my acceptance letter, I began, holding out the paper. I really want to go. I just need help covering the first semester. After that, I'll get a job to pay the rest. Mom didn't look at the paper, she just glanced at me over the stack of folded t-shirts. Maya, be realistic, college isn't for everyone. But I got in. It's not even a good school. Besides, do you really think you're cut out for it? She folded a shirt sharply like she was packing her irritation into every crease. I turned to Dad, still holding on to hope. I could take out a student loan, I'll pay back every cent, I promise, I'll work, I'll save. Whatever it takes. Dad didn't take his eyes off the screen, he just said, flatly, my parents don't take out loans. That's a principle. Our family has never borrowed from anyone, and we're not starting because of you. I was speechless. But you've been saving for Lauren for over 10 years. She has a clear goal, she has achievements, she deserves it, my mother said, her voice sharp as a knife. What about me? Don't I deserve it? You should think about a stable job. Your father still needs help at the shop. The pay isn't bad. And there's no debt involved. Everyone needs an honest job, Maya. I felt like I was falling into a black hole. No rope, no one reaching out. I left the living room, legs heavy, still clutching the now crumpled acceptance letter. The bedroom door closed behind me, like a gate, locking away the last bit of hope I ever had. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk, staring out the dark window, thinking about all the years I had tried. The late-night studying, the extracurriculars I joined, the encouragement from teachers. But turned out, it was all a joke in my parents' eyes. The next morning I woke up with a new determination. If my parents didn't believe in me, I'd find someone who did. I had only one place to go. My grandparents. I went to their house on a gloomy Friday afternoon, carrying a backpack and a broken heart. The little wooden house on the edge of town where I'd once spent peaceful childhood summers had become my last thread of hope. My grandma opened the door, worry filling her eyes when she saw my tear-stained face. Maya, what happened, sweetie? I couldn't say anything for the first few minutes, every word shattered in my throat. When I sat down at the kitchen table, clutching the warm glass of water she handed me, the tears broke free again. I got my college acceptance letter, I choked out. But my parents, they refused to help. They said I'm not cut out for college. They told me I should be a waitress instead. Grandma placed her hand on my shoulder and gave it a gentle squeeze without saying a word. As I told the whole story, even how I'd begged to take out a loan with a legal contract, how they'd saved for Lauren for over a decade but not a single cent for me, my grandpa had quietly taken a seat across the table, his expression darkening. He was a man of few words, but when he finally spoke, his voice was deep and resolute. I'll be damned if I let you give up your dream just because some adults don't know how to be fair. But you don't have money, I whispered, guilt creeping in. If it's not there, we'll make it, he said, like it was the simplest truth in the world. The old house in Eugene is still there, land passed down from my father, but if selling it means buying your future, then it's worth it. I was stunned. That house was where they used to live before retirement. It wasn't big, but to them it was a lifetime. The thought of them giving it up for me made my chest ache. I can't let you do that. You can, Grandma cut in, holding my hand. You have to, because you deserve this, and because your parents are wrong. The following week passed like a whirlwind. Grandpa contacted a realtor, took me to the bank, then to a lawyer to ensure everything was handled properly. When he signed the sale contract, I noticed his hand trembling slightly. I bit my lip to hold back tears. "I'll pay it back. I'll work so hard, I promise." "You don't owe us a thing," he smiled. "But if one day you succeed, just remember this place will always be home." I enrolled in a public university in Denver, majoring in investment management. I chose the farthest place possible so I wouldn't have to see my family during the holidays. From the day I got on that bus and left town, I never called my parents, and no one called me. Lauren didn't text. Mom didn't ask. Dad, the one who used to teach me how to fix my bike, was just a faded shadow in my memory. College was a long stretch of freedom and loneliness. I worked part-time at the library, then later at a cafe near the dorms. Every dollar I earned, I saved, not to send home, but to prove I could live without them. I studied day and night. I volunteered for every project, every workshop. I knew I didn't have the luxury of making mistakes. Whenever I felt exhausted, I looked at the old photo of me with Grandma and Grandpa in front of the house in Eugene. The house that had become my tuition. 4 years flew by. I graduated with honors, standing on the stage to receive my diploma, with no one from my family in the audience. Only a call from Grandma that morning, saying, "Today, you made us prouder than anyone ever has." After graduation, I returned to the city, full of hope, applying to every job I could find. With my academic record, internship experience, and extracurriculars, I thought I'd land a stable job quickly. But life wasn't as easy as the theories in my investment textbooks. 3 weeks passed, then 7, then 2 months. All I got were rejection emails. Some said I lacked practical experience, others said they were hiring internally. One day I had 3 interviews back to back, and came home so exhausted I collapsed on the floor, still clutching my resume. I started to worry. The savings I had left after 4 years of college were running out. I took on small jobs, data entry, part-time assistant, and kept asking myself, were my parents right? Was I not cut out for this path? But every time that thought crossed my mind, I remembered the look in Grandpa's eyes when he signed the papers to sell the house. No, I couldn't let their sacrifice be for nothing. I would keep going, no matter what. In the 3rd month after graduation, I got a call from a small investment firm called Crescent Capital, located on the 3rd floor of an old office building in the Denver suburbs. At that point, I had no other options. My savings were nearly gone, bills were piling up, and I felt abandoned by the very industry I'd once believed would change my life. The interview lasted just 15 minutes. The HR manager, a balding man named Rob, glanced through my resume and said, "We need someone to do market analysis. Starting pay is $2,500 a month pre-tax. No quarterly bonuses, no raises in the first 6 months. Do you accept?" I nodded immediately. I had nothing to negotiate with. All I could think was, it doesn't matter where I start, as long as I don't stop. Every morning, I caught the 6:15 bus and arrived at the office before everyone else to read market reports. My desk was near the women's restroom, the chair had a broken backrest, and the computer screen only lit up after a few taps. But I didn't complain. I took notes on everything, asked for more work, volunteered for reports others avoided. I learned to read data like it was the language of money. One October afternoon, while I was buried in tech stock numbers, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Alina Tran, my college roommate who had majored in international finance. I hadn't heard from her since graduation. "Maya," her voice rang with excitement. "I'm working at Maxwell Investment Group. They just opened a new branch in Denver. HR's looking for someone who's strong in analysis and can handle pressure. I already gave them your resume." I was stunned. Maxwell was the dream of every investment management student, one of the biggest financial firms in the country. For the first time in months, my heart beat fast, not from anxiety, but from hope. A week later, I stood in front of Maxwell's temporary office downtown, floors so polished you could see your reflection, employees dressed like they'd just stepped out of Forbes magazine. The interview lasted over 2 hours, with 3 consecutive rounds. They asked everything, from macro investment strategies to how I'd respond if I lost a client $10 million. I answered each question, pulling from everything I had learned at Crescent. A week later, I got the acceptance email, with the contract attached. Starting salary $7,800 per month, plus quarterly bonuses, full benefits, and international training opportunities. I read that email over and over, tears falling before I even realized. I submitted my resignation at Crescent. No one tried to stop me, no one said goodbye. But I wasn't bitter. That was just the starting line. At Maxwell, I became a machine that never stopped. While others clocked out at 5 p.m., I stayed until 9, diving into analysis, proposing strategies, learning new investment algorithms. My first assignment was managing a portfolio for a mid-size healthcare company. 3 months later, I helped them achieve a 32% growth, far exceeding initial expectations. My name started coming up in senior strategy meetings. "How did you do it?" the department head Mr. Hansen asked during my performance review. "I don't allow myself to fail," I answered without hesitation. My first quarterly bonus was $28,000, a number that once felt like a far-off dream. I moved out of my cramped suburban apartment and bought a high-rise condo in Skyline Ridge, with a balcony facing the Rocky Mountains and polished walnut floors. A few months later, I put a down payment on my dream car, a sleek black BMW X5, and drove it straight to my grandparents' house. When Grandpa stepped into the yard, his eyes flicked from the car to me, lips moving but no words coming out. "I want you to keep the car, it's a gift," I said, placing the keys in his hand. "I wouldn't be here today without you both." Grandma hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. And Grandpa, usually so reserved, couldn't hide the tears shimmering in his eyes. But I knew the journey wasn't over. This first taste of success was just the foundation. I hadn't forgotten the looks that dismissed me, the words that broke me from within. And I hadn't forgiven. I was sitting in my office, in a high-packed black leather chair, golden afternoon light casting long shadows across my desk, when the phone rang. The caller ID read, "Lauren." I stared at the blinking name for a long moment, 1,000 questions running through my mind. The last time I heard her voice was 4 years ago, when I stood at our doorstep begging to go to college. She glanced at me once, then turned back to finish her makeup. I picked up the phone. "Maya, oh my God, your voice sounds so different. I didn't think you still used this number." Lauren's voice was sweet like syrup, but to me, it smelled like expired perfume. "What do you want?" I cut her off, not in the mood for small talk. "I, just wanted to invite you to dinner this weekend. The whole family will be there. There's something important we need to discuss." I stayed silent for a few seconds. There was something in her tone that made me cautious, but then I nodded. Partly out of curiosity, partly because I wanted to look them in the eye, the people who once looked down on me. For the first time, from a position that was equal, if not higher. Saturday night, I arrived at Maple Grove Bistro, a fancy restaurant downtown. I wore a simple cream-colored fitted dress, light makeup, and the black heels I bought for myself after my first quarterly bonus. When I walked in, my mother's eyes scanned me like an X-ray, while my father just gave a small nod. Lauren, of course, looked like a movie star. She wore a wine-red dress, matching nail polish, and sat beside a man I'd never seen, the typical Wall Street lawyer type, with a tailored suit and an arrogant expression. "This is Brandon, your sister's fiancé," my mother said, like it was the most important news on earth. I nodded. Brandon didn't shake my hand, just gave a smug smile. Dinner went on with obvious pretension. They asked a few questions about my job, faked admiration when they heard Maxwell Investment Group, then quickly shifted to the real topic, the one they clearly cared about more. "We're planning the wedding for May," Mom began, smiling politely. "At Evergreen Country Club, you know the place, Maya." Very prestigious. We've agreed to split the cost with Brandon's family, Dad added, swirling his wine glass. The total cost is around $300,000. I nodded. Quietly cut a piece of salmon on my plate. I knew what was coming. The thing is, Mom glanced at me, her fingers gently tapping her wineglass. Our portion isn't quite enough. And since you're doing so well, we thought. $150,000, I cut her off, lifting my gaze. You want me to give $150,000 to fund my sister's wedding? The air at the table instantly thickened. Alone, Dad said quickly. Just a loan, sweetheart. We'll sign papers, do everything properly. The whole family believes in you. Believes in me? I let out a cold laugh, sharp like glass. Like how you believed in me when I begged for college tuition, when I pleaded for a legally binding loan, and Mom said, "This family doesn't borrow money." My mother's face turned from red to pale. Brandon looked down at his phone. Lauren suddenly leaned forward, her voice sharp. Maya, you're being ridiculous. This is my wedding. If you won't help your own sister, the only one in the family with a real future, then who will you help? I set my knife and fork down, slowly dabbed my lips with the napkin and stood up. I built everything from zero. None of you helped. None of you asked how I was doing. And now, because you want a $300,000 wedding, I'm supposed to open my wallet? No, I'm not funding the dreams of people who once told me I wasn't worth it. Maya, you'll never be like me, Lauren yelled as I walked away. I turned back, smiling, the restaurant lights catching in my eyes like steel. I don't need to be like you. I am living a life you never had the guts to dream of. That night, my phone rang non-stop. I didn't answer. The next morning, I got a text from Lauren. You ungrateful, selfish bitch. You think you're better than everyone? You're just a money-hungry nobody with no family. You'll die alone. I read it, then deleted it, no reply. Because for the first time I realized my silence was worth more than any comeback. Less than 3 days after that awful dinner, Grandpa called me. His voice was rough with anger, but still sharp enough to avoid cursing. A rare thing when he was truly mad. Maya, your father just called me. I froze, my heart jumped. What do they want now? Money, he said, voice like a knife's edge. They asked if Grandma and I would sell the car you gave us. Said, a luxury car like that could cover the whole wedding. I asked him back. Are you out of your damn mind? I gripped the phone tighter, my chest tightening. They seriously brought that up? Not only did they bring it up, he said, they acted like it was the most logical thing in the world. Your mom said, she doesn't need to show off like that to her old grandparents. What, the car's for grocery runs? Or to impress the neighbors? Hearing that felt like swallowing ice. What did you do? I asked. I hung up, he replied without hesitation, then blocked the number. I was quiet for a moment, unsure whether to laugh or cry. But one thing I knew. At least in this world, there were still 2 people who had never turned their backs on me. A week later, rumors started spreading through town like a toxic wind blowing across the fields. At the weekend farmers market where Grandma usually bought vegetables, one of her old friends came up and said, straight to her face, I heard Maya's all high and mighty now? Got rich and looks down on her whole family, never visits, never invites anyone to her place. What kind of life is that? Grandma told me about it later, her eyes red with frustration. They talk like you're some heartless girl who abandoned her family for money. They don't know. They don't know anything. The thought, I know. I held her hand. And I don't need them to know, as long as you and Grandpa know the truth. But it didn't stop there. One night I got a message from Aunt Melinda, my dad's younger sister, someone I used to be close to when I was a kid. Maya, I heard from your mom, they're really hurt. They say you refuse to help just because of the past. I hope you're not letting success cloud your heart. I closed the phone and scoffed. It wasn't success that blinded me, It was the way they only came back when I had something they wanted that opened my eyes. The next day I went for a walk with Grandma and Grandpa at the park behind their building. Grandma brought an old checkered blanket, Grandpa brought hot coffee, and I carried a small camera to take a few portraits. We sat on the grass, watching ducks swim across the quiet lake. "You're not going to explain?" Grandpa asked. "To who?" I replied. "To that flock of vultures circling around, listening to one side and spreading garbage like gospel." I shook my head. People believe what they want to believe. No matter what I say, they'll twist it to suit the person they're used to pitying. "My girl," Grandma said softly, "sometimes silence is an answer. But if it lasts too long, it starts to sound like agreement." I knew she was right. But I also knew I had been through enough to understand this. I no longer owed anyone the burden of justifying their cruelty. A week later, I stopped by the supermarket near their place. As I was bagging tomatoes, I heard a voice behind me, loud enough for me to catch. "That's her. I heard she's loaded now, but won't give her family a single penny. Her poor mom cried her eyes out while she lives in a fancy penthouse." I turned around and locked eyes with Mrs. Clara, an old friend of my mom's. She looked flustered, but didn't apologize. I stared straight at her, said nothing, then turned and walked away. But inside I felt something strange. Not anger, not sadness, but a calm, deliberate indifference. For the first time, I felt light. Like I didn't have to carry the weight of trying to make others understand me anymore. Because the truth was known by the only people that mattered. And they were walking right beside me. Slow but steady. Like they always had been. I was sipping my espresso in the quiet of my penthouse on a Saturday morning when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not on the weekend, which I reserved for peace, for stillness, for zero drama. I got up, opened the door, and froze for a second. Lauren. She wore a beige silk dress, a designer bag slung over her shoulder, and makeup done like she was headed to a press conference, not to beg. "Maya," she tried to smile. "Do you have a few minutes?" I folded my arms across my chest, blocking the entrance. "What are you doing here?" "To talk," she said softly, trying to sound gentle. "This can't go on forever. We're sisters after all." I silently opened the door wider and pointed to the living room. "Come in. But you only have 5 minutes." Lauren stepped inside, her eyes drifting over the walnut floors, the framed artwork, the floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city. I didn't need to look at her to know what she was thinking. "This place is beautiful. Do you live here alone?" "Get to the point," I said, sitting down in the armchair across from her. She sat sideways, trying to keep her tone soft. "Maya, I know things went too far, but you have to understand. Mom is heartbroken. She can't sleep. Dad's stressing himself gray. They already put down the deposit for the venue, hired a wedding planner, sent out invitations. If they can't come up with the rest now, they'll be humiliated in front of Brandon's family." "What does that have to do with me?" I asked, my voice flat as a still lake on a cold night. "A lot, actually," Lauren snapped, then quickly lowered her voice. "If my family doesn't pay the rest, Brandon's side will look down on us. They'll think we're poor and don't know how to maintain our dignity. So what they think is their problem." "Maya, please. This is about the family's honor." I stood up and walked to the window. The city sparkled below, each high-rise like a pillar I had built with my own blood and tears. Honor. When I was on my knees begging to go to college, what did they give me? A cold rejection. When my grandparents had to sell their house and land, they didn't even blink. When I succeeded, the only thing they remembered wasn't me, it was my bank account. "Maya, I know, but..." "No. You don't know anything." I turned around, looking straight into the eyes of the woman once celebrated by the whole family like a queen, now sitting on my couch, flustered and humiliated. "You don't know I lived off instant noodles for 3 months because I was scared I'd run out of money. You don't know I had to work 2 jobs just to pay for tuition. And you definitely don't know that every time I visited Grandma and Grandpa, I had to hear the neighbors call me the ungrateful child. Lauren bit her lip, speechless. I stepped forward and pointed to the door. Leave this house. And don't ever come back. I'm no longer the family's wallet. I'm no longer the little sister hiding in your shadow. I am Maya, the woman who built her life from zero, while your entire family threw me off a cliff. Maya, you'll regret this. You don't know what you're doing. Her voice trembled, but it wasn't from guilt. It was from anger. I opened the door. I have no regrets, but you will for losing the only person in the family who suffered in silence and asked for nothing in return. She stood up, walked past me, the scent of expensive perfume trailing behind her, leaving no impression other than pure pretense. When the door clicked shut behind her, I stood still for a moment, listening to her high heels fading down the empty hallway. I sat down, my hands slightly trembling, not from regret, but because for the first time in my life I had just shut out a blood relative without feeling an ounce of guilt. And I knew that was the sign of freedom. 1 week after Lauren left my apartment in defeat, a message from my old college friend Alina popped up on my phone, with the caption, "Hot gossip. Lauren's wedding got downgraded, her parents couldn't pay their share, and the groom's family called them out. Big drama at the Riviera Club." I read it without surprise. Everything built on greed and lies eventually collapses. According to Elena, during the pre-wedding party at the country club, the kind reserved for the region's so-called elite, my parents were pulled aside by Brandon's mother for a conversation. They had to admit they couldn't pay what they promised. In a room full of candlelight, wine glasses and soft piano music, the truth dropped like a boulder. Brandon's mother, as described, didn't need to raise her voice to show contempt. A single glance from her could freeze the room, and that's exactly what she did. Elena said her look was like spotting a stain on her silk gloves. The wedding still happened, but not at the Evergreen Country Club. The luxury venue was replaced with a smaller banquet hall on the outskirts. The custom gown was swapped for a cheaper model, half the floral arrangements were cut, and most notably, the grand bridal procession was cancelled. I didn't receive an invitation, obviously. My grandparents did, though. A card that arrived late with no note, no phone call. We stared at it on the breakfast table, like it was a piece of misplaced paper. "Are we going?" I asked, voice soft as a breeze. Grandpa just sipped his coffee and shook his head. "You think that invitation shows any real intention?" Grandma gave a sad smile. "They sent it out of formality. But we don't live by formality." And so, on the day Lauren walked down the aisle in a discounted wedding dress with a forced smile, I spread a red and white checkered picnic blanket with Grandma and Grandpa on the lawn behind their house. Grandma made my favorite egg salad. Grandpa brought out a bottle of old wine from her 60th birthday. "To you," Grandpa said, raising his glass. "To what?" I laughed. "To the fact that you didn't become part of that fake family." We ate, laughed, shared stories from the past, while birds sang in the trees and sunlight spilled over the distant hills. No classical music, no glowing candles. Just genuine warmth. Something I'd never felt at any so-called family gathering before. That night I received a photo from a friend who worked for the event company. A side-angle shot of Lauren and Brandon posing with my parents. My mom's face was stiff, her smile like it had been glued on. My dad stood like a statue, hands limp at his sides, eyes avoiding the camera. The groom's family looked polite, but cold. Like actors in a play no one wanted to be in. I didn't laugh. I didn't feel smug. I just felt relieved. Like a painful chapter had truly come to an end. Since that day, I've had no further contact with them. My parents' numbers are blocked. Lauren never messaged again. I don't care what they say, what rumors they spread, or what stories they tell their relatives. Those who still believe them, I no longer need to keep. I kept working, I kept rising. The following month, I was promoted to lead strategic analyst at Maxwell. I moved to a new apartment in Highgate Hills, complete with a rooftop pool and 24/7 gym. Each morning I wake up to sunlight filtering through the curtains, brew coffee in my marble kitchen, and listen to whatever music I want. No more yelling, no more demands to be realistic. Each evening, I decide what to eat, what to read, what to do. No one schedules my life anymore. I, Maya, live a life I once thought only existed in dreams. A life that doesn't need anyone's approval. A life where I don't have to ask permission to be myself. And the most beautiful part of all, I no longer hurt when I think of my family. Because I built my own. From my grandparents' love, my own two hands, and the strength it took to say no at the right time. My story isn't just about a journey from darkness to light, it's proof that sometimes, family isn't where love lives. I learned to rise from being overlooked, to stop being the backup plan in my own home. My success didn't come from luck. It came from cutting off what was toxic. Now, I live the life I chose, unashamed, unbowed, and completely free. What do you think of Maya's decision? Was she too harsh, or was it the protection she needed? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful true life stories about family and self-discovery.